An old veteran sought peace on a remote Montana land, but that peace was shattered when his dog, acting strangely, began barking and scratching at an old shed. That action revealed a mystery buried for a century, a story of love and betrayal, and a forgotten family legacy. Now, he and his four-legged friend must decipher the past, because it is not just a story, but a destiny under threat. Please support us by subscribing to the channel to discover this story. The Montana wind, crisp and biting, was a companion Robinson had come to appreciate. It whispered through the pines and across the vast open fields that stretched out before him, a landscape of solitude and stark beauty that finally felt like home. He was a tall man, slightly thin but with a wiry strength honed by years of military service. His face, rugged and etched with the lines of past sorrows, held a kindness in the eyes that seemed to have survived everything. His short brown hair showed flecks of gray at the temples, a quiet testament to the passage of time. He was dressed for the cold, an old brown leather jacket worn over a navy, gray, and beige checkered shirt. His faded denim jeans tucked into a pair of sturdy work boots that had seen their share of miles. By his side trotted Ash, a 5-year-old German shepherd whose coat was a striking mix of gray and white. Ash was more than just a dog, he was a partner, a sentinel who shared his burdens in a way no human could. His temperament was a perfect blend of alert intelligence and quiet loyalty. For the past 6 months, they had been on a quest for a new beginning, a place where the noise of the world and the ghosts of the past could not follow. Robinson had found this place by chance, a remote plot of land listed at an unbelievably low price. It was far from the nearest town, a canvas of wild grass and untamed forest that spoke to his need for space. The transaction was swift and impersonal, a few emails and a wire transfer, all it took to make a piece of Montana his. The property listing was minimal, no detailed survey or list of existing structures. It was a blank slate, and that's what he had wanted. They had driven for hours to get here, the last leg of the journey, a winding dirt road that seemed to disappear into the horizon. Now, standing on his own land for the first time, Robinson took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth. He knelt down, running a hand through the soil, feeling the gritty reality of his new life. Ash nudged his hand with a wet nose, his tail giving a single, slow wag. This was it. This was the place. He and Ash began to walk the perimeter, the dog's paws silent on the soft ground. Robinson was already mentally mapping out the perfect spot for his house. He pictured a modest cabin with a wide porch where he and Ash could sit and watch the seasons change. The vast, empty space was exactly what he had imagined. But as they rounded a thicket of overgrown shrubs, the perfect solitude was broken. There, tucked away and almost swallowed by the wild vegetation, was a shed. It was old, its wood planks gray and splintered, the paint peeling away in tattered strips. It wasn't mentioned in any of the property documents. Robinson was initially puzzled. Who had built this? Why was it left here? He stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. Suddenly, Ash let out a low growl. It was a sound Robinson hadn't heard from him in a long time, a deep rumbling from his chest that was reserved for moments of genuine alarm. Ash's hackles rose slightly, and he took a protective stance in front of Robinson, his body tense. Robinson reached out, placing a reassuring hand on the dog's flank. "Hey, boy, what is it?" he murmured. Ash ignored him, his gaze fixed on the shed. He began to bark, a sharp, insistent sound that echoed in the quiet air. He started to paw at the ground, then moved closer to the shed and began to scratch frantically at the warped wood of the door, whining in a way that sounded almost desperate. Robinson had never seen Ash behave like this. His dog was trained to be calm and steady, a picture of disciplined composure. This was a complete departure from his normal demeanor. It wasn't an aggressive bark. It was a demand, an urgent plea for Robinson to pay attention. It was as if the dog saw something that no one else could, something buried within the decaying structure that only he could sense. Robinson's puzzle turned to intrigue. He moved closer, approaching the shed with a newfound sense of caution. The rusty padlock on the door seemed defiant, a stubborn guardian of whatever lay within. He tried to peer through a crack in the wall, but could see nothing but darkness. The air around the shed felt different, heavy, with a silent history. Ash's barking grew more frantic, his nails scraping against the wood. He was not just trying to get in, he was trying to tear the door down, a frenzy of purpose that drew Robinson in completely. It was clear that the shed wasn't just an old, forgotten building. For some reason, it held a profound significance for Ash, and by extension, for Robinson himself. He placed his hand on the door, feeling the cold, rough texture of the wood. The lock looked ancient, a solid block of rusted metal that would likely require heavy tools to open. Robinson had only brought a basic set, but he knew at that moment what his next step would be. He couldn't ignore his dog's reaction. Whatever was inside that shed, Ash was telling him it was important. He felt a shiver of anticipation run down his spine, a feeling he hadn't had since before his service ended. This quiet piece of land was not as simple as it seemed. It held a secret, and his best friend had just told him it was time to uncover it. Robinson felt the weight of Ash's plea. It was more than a demand. It was a clear signal that the shed held a secret of profound importance. Leaving Ash standing guard, his low growl a constant reminder of the urgency, Robinson walked back to his truck. He rummaged through the toolkit in the back, his fingers closing around the cold metal handles of a large pair of bolt cutters. The padlock on the shed door was stubborn and ancient, but he knew this tool would make quick work of it. Returning to the shed, he saw Ash had not moved, his gray and white fur bristling with focus. Robinson met his dog's eyes for a moment, and in them he saw a quiet intensity, a reflection of the unbreakable bond they shared. It was a trust that went beyond words. Ash knew something, and Robinson was ready to follow his lead. "Okay, boy," Robinson said, his voice low and steady. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." He knelt and positioned the cutters around the rusted loop of the padlock. With a grunt of effort, he squeezed the handles. The cutters bit into the corroded metal with a loud snap, the sound echoing sharply across the silent landscape. The lock broke cleanly, falling to the ground with a dull thud. Robinson took a moment to admire the satisfying finality of the act. He had broken the seal of a forgotten past. He pushed the door open, the old hinges groaning in protest. A puff of dusty, stale air rushed out, carrying the smell of decay and 100 years of stillness. Robinson used his forearm to clear the cobwebs from the entrance before stepping inside, with Ash right behind him. He pulled a small flashlight from his jacket pocket and switched it on, a thin beam cutting through the gloom. The shed was a tomb of forgotten things. Dust motes danced in the lone shafts of sunlight that pierced the walls through tiny cracks. Every surface was coated in a thick layer of grime. It was not a simple storage space. It was a time capsule. Along one wall stood a collection of rusty tools, their shapes familiar, but their purpose long since outdated. A worn-out plow blade leaned against a corner. On a workbench, a few empty glass bottles and a single, cracked oil lamp sat untouched. Robinson's light swept over a broken wooden chair, a stack of old burlap sacks, and what looked like a tattered horse blanket hanging from a nail. Robinson felt a strange sense of reverence. He was not just in a dusty shed, he was standing in someone's past. He pictured a farmer or a rancher, a person long since gone, working here with their hands, using these very tools. He thought about the simple lives that had once occupied this land. Lives he now had a chance to connect with. Ash, however, was not interested in the general history. His focus was singular and unwavering. He moved with a purpose that stood in stark contrast to Robinson's meandering observations. The dog's nose was to the ground, sniffing methodically, his tail held low. He didn't bother with the old farming equipment or the dusty furniture. Ash was on a mission, a silent, determined detective, searching for a specific scent. He wove through the clutter and shadows, a living compass pointing the way. Robinson watched him, a mix of fascination and wonder in his heart. It was a perfect display of a dog's instincts, a pure, unclouded focus on a task that no human could replicate. Ash paused at the far corner of the shed, where the light did not reach. He began to nose at a pile of what looked like old, stained canvas tarps. He let out a soft whine, then looked back at Robinson as if to say, "This is it. This is where you need to look." In no, however, and matter God. Robinson followed, his boots crunching on the dusty floor. He knelt beside Ash, who was now scratching at the corner of the largest tarp. The material was stiff and grimy. Robinson reached out and tugged at it. It was heavy, weighted by the years of dust and the items it concealed. With Ash whining with anticipation beside him, Robinson pulled back the thick canvas. He saw not one, but several wooden crates, stacked haphazardly. They were old and weather-beaten, their surfaces dark and stained. The wood was solid and intact, suggesting they had been sealed for a very long time. Ash nudged the top crate with his nose, then looked up at Robinson, his dark eyes filled with a shared sense of discovery. The shed wasn't a mere collection of forgotten relics. It was a carefully concealed vault, and Robinson and Ash had just found its main treasure. What could possibly be inside? The discovery of the crates was a silent promise of secrets held for decades. With a shared sense of anticipation, Robinson and Ash knelt before the first one. Robinson's hands, calloused and strong, worked to pry open the wooden lid. The sound of splintering wood mingled with the dry rustle of air escaping its long confinement. The scent that wafted up was of old paper, dust, and something else, something akin to forgotten memories. Inside, the crate held a haphazard assortment of items. Robinson carefully lifted out a stack of brittle, sepia-toned photographs. They showed men and women dressed in styles from over a century ago. Their faces were serious, their eyes holding a stillness that belonged to another era. Robinson felt a quiet reverence as he held the images of people whose lives had once unfolded on this very land. Next were a handful of letters, their envelopes fragile, and their script a delicate, looping hand that had long since faded. Ash, ever the focal point of Robinson's attention, nudged his hand, whining softly, as if urging him to hurry. The dog didn't care for the faces in the photos or the words on the letters. His interest was solely in the one item his nose told him was most important. Robinson smiled faintly, a ghost of a smile that hadn't reached his face in years. He trusted Ash's instincts implicitly, and he knew the dog was trying to guide him. He continued to sift through the crate, pushing aside what appeared to be scraps of fabric and small decorative objects. Then, his fingers brushed against a thick roll of paper. He pulled it out, and as he unrolled it, he immediately recognized its purpose. This was not a random document. It was a blueprint. The moment he saw it, a different kind of focus took over Robinson. Before his military service, he had been a civil engineer. The precise lines, the detailed annotations, and the meticulous measurements on the paper spoke to him in a language he understood perfectly. It was a language of logic and design, a welcome relief from the mysteries of the past he had been dealing with. He spread the blueprint flat on the dusty floor, smoothing out the curls. Ash immediately put his nose down, sniffing along the edges of the paper with a focused intensity. The design was intricate and well drawn. It was a plan for a grand structure, perhaps a house or an estate, a far cry from the simple shed that housed it. But what truly captured Robinson's attention was in the bottom right corner, where a signature should have been. It was not a name, but a peculiar symbol, the initials RS enclosed within an upside-down triangle. The letters were bold and clear, etched with confidence. Robinson's mind reeled. The symbol. He had seen it before, somewhere, though he couldn't place it. A jolt of familiarity ran through him, a strange, disjointed memory that felt like trying to recall a forgotten dream. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. The feeling was so strong, so definite. It was as if a part of his own history was being called to him. He sat back on his heels, lost in thought. Ash, sensing the shift in his master's focus, nudged the blueprint with his nose. The dog pushed the paper directly toward the corner with the signature, as if to say, "Look closer. This is the key." Ash's behavior was not random. Robinson knew it. He knew that the dog was telling him this was not just a design. It was a clue. Robinson ran a hand over his face, feeling the fatigue of the day and the weight of the questions building in his mind. Who was RS? Why did this symbol feel so personal to him? Why was his dog, of all things, so fixated on it? What was the connection between a 100-year-old blueprint and his own life? He held the blueprint in his hands, feeling not just the paper, but the heavy reality of a mystery that was now inextricably linked to his new life. It was a past he never knew he had, and it was demanding to be uncovered. The feeling of familiarity from the RS signature gnawed at Robinson. It was a persistent itch he couldn't scratch, a half-remembered tune that kept playing in his mind. He and Ash drove back from the property, the blueprint safely rolled up on the passenger seat. Robinson knew his plans for a simple, quiet life had just changed. This was no longer just about building a home. It was about solving a mystery. The next morning, with a new sense of purpose, Robinson drove into the nearest town. Ash sat in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the horizon with the same unwavering focus he had shown at the shed. The town was small and rustic, its main street lined with brick buildings and old-fashioned storefronts. His destination was the public library, a quaint stone structure with large windows that promised a peaceful refuge from the world. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and wood polish. Robinson explained his mission to the librarian, a kindly older woman with silver hair who directed him to the historical archives. For the next few days, Robinson became a fixture in that quiet room. He meticulously sifted through microfilm reels, watching faded images of old newspaper articles and land deeds scroll across a screen. He pored over dusty town ledgers, trying to match the initials RS to any name in the area's history. Ash waited patiently in the truck outside, a vigilant guardian of his master's quest. Robinson would step out every hour or so to give Ash a quick walk and a pat, a silent reaffirmation of their partnership. The work was slow and frustrating. The more he searched, the more elusive the initials became. He found no record of a landowner named RS connected to his property. He found no mention of the symbol of an upside-down triangle. The library's meticulously organized archives felt like a giant maze with no exit. He hit dead ends everywhere. He began to feel a familiar sense of futility, a feeling he hadn't experienced since leaving his old life behind. He had hoped for a simple, clear answer, but the past was proving to be just as complicated as the future. After a full week of searching, with nothing to show for his efforts, Robinson sat back in his chair, a stack of blank-faced papers beside him. He closed his eyes, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The mystery was deeper than he had anticipated. He realized he had been approaching this with a veteran's mindset, a solo mission, relying only on his own skills. But this wasn't a military operation. This was history, and history was a community's shared memory. He decided on a new strategy. He walked down the street to the local newspaper office. It was a small, bustling room filled with the clatter of keyboards and the smell of ink. He spoke to the receptionist and drafted a small, classified ad to be run for the next 2 weeks. It was a simple message, stripped of any melodrama. The ad read, "Seeking information on land history. Recently acquired property near Pine Ridge. Found old shed. With documents. Looking for information on original owner, possibly associated with the initials RS. Any knowledge of the land or its history appreciated." As he wrote the ad, Robinson felt a profound shift within himself. This was not just a chore to get out of the way before he could build his house. The act of writing the words, of asking for help from strangers, was an acknowledgement that this was a shared story. What had started as a simple land purchase had transformed into something much more personal, something sacred. He was no longer just buying a plot of land. He was inheriting a piece of the past. The questions about the symbol, the blueprint, and the people behind them had become as important to him as his own identity. Leaving the newspaper office, he felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced since finding the shed. The mystery was still there, but now it was a collective effort. He went back to the truck and opened the door. Ash stood up, giving him a gentle nudge. Robinson ruffled the dog's gray and white fur. The dog had started all this, and he was the only one who seemed to have known the answer all along. Robinson knew he couldn't have done any of this without him. The journey wasn't about him or the shed. It was about the two of them, together, exploring a past that was calling out to them from the silent wilderness of Montana. Days turned into a week, and then two. The Montana autumn settled in, bringing with it a sharp chill that made Robinson grateful for the old leather jacket. He and Ash fell into a new rhythm, spending their days on the property, where Robinson worked on basic repairs to his truck and Ash chased squirrels through the fields. Every morning, Robinson checked the small local newspaper, scanning the pages for any response to his ad. The quiet solitude he had sought was now tinged with a constant, low-level anticipation. The mystery of RS was a shadow that followed them everywhere. The call came late one evening, as Robinson was preparing their dinner. The phone screen showed a number he didn't recognize. He answered, a sense of cautious curiosity bubbling up inside him. The voice on the other end was gentle and warm, with the slow, deliberate cadence of a man who had lived a long time in the mountains. "Robinson?" the voice asked. "My name is Mr. Dalton. I saw your ad in the paper. I don't normally pay much mind to those things, but your description of the land, it sounded familiar to me." Mr. Dalton explained that he was a former local historian, now retired. He had been a friend of Robinson's family, an old acquaintance of his parents who had moved away years ago. He was a man with a mind like a steel trap, filled with stories and facts about the area's history. The ad about the shed and the land had triggered something deep in his memory. They agreed to meet the following day. The next morning, Robinson and Ash drove to a small cafe in town. Mr. Dalton was already waiting for them at a corner table. He was a kindly man with a shock of pure white hair and a thoughtful expression. He offered a warm smile to Robinson and knelt to greet Ash, who sniffed his hand and gave a polite wag of his tail. Mr. Dalton offered him a dog biscuit, a small gesture that immediately put Robinson at ease. They settled into their seats, and Robinson laid out the blueprint on the table, pointing to the RS signature. Mr. Dalton put on a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and leaned in, his eyes scanning the detailed drawings. "Fascinating," Mr. Dalton murmured, his fingers tracing the lines on the paper. This level of detail, very unusual for the time. He then began to tell them a story, a tale of a long-lost family. "That land," Mr. Dalton began, "was once owned by the Reynolds family. They were quite prominent in the 19th century. They came here to seek their fortune. They were builders, visionaries, and they owned a considerable amount of land in this area." He went on to describe how the family, led by the patriarch Thomas Reynolds, had a reputation for generosity and philanthropy. They were a pillar of the community, and their legacy was immense. Mr. Dalton pulled out a few old, faded photographs from a satchel he had brought with him. "I have some of their family portraits in my collection. They were known for being quite private, but their influence was felt far and wide." He showed Robinson the photographs, but they were of a generation long before the one that had left behind the relics in the shed. "The funny thing is," Mr. Dalton continued, "the family lineage just ended. There's no clear record of what happened. One day, they were here. The next, they were gone. The land went to the state, and over time, people just forgot about it." Robinson listened intently, a mix of awe and disappointment in his heart. The story of the Reynolds family was a breakthrough, a vital piece of the puzzle. But the central mystery remained untouched. Robinson pointed to the RS symbol again. "Did you ever see this?" he asked. "Do you know what it stands for?" Mr. Dalton's face creased with thought, a look of genuine confusion clouding his features. He examined the symbol, turning it this way and that. "No," he said finally, a note of sadness in his voice. "I'm sorry, Robinson. In all my research on the Reynolds family, I never came across those initials. The symbol, it means nothing to me." Robinson felt the wind go out of his sails. Ash, who had been listening from his spot beside the table, let out a soft sigh. Robinson placed a reassuring hand on his dog's head. He thanked Mr. Dalton for his help and promised to keep him updated if anything changed. As they walked back to the truck, Robinson felt more lost than when he began. He had a family name, Reynolds, but no link to the man who had created the blueprint. The mystery of RS had only grown deeper. The question remained, who was he, and why did his blueprint feel so familiar? Robinson looked down at Ash, his silent companion, and a far more reliable guide than any historian. He knew their journey was far from over. The meeting with Mr. Dalton, though fruitful in one respect, had left Robinson feeling more frustrated than ever. He had a family name, Reynolds, but the central mystery of RS remained unsolved. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, Robinson and Ash returned to the shed. The disappointment had hardened into a quiet resolve. If the answer wasn't in the town's archives, it had to be here, hidden in the very place where the mystery began. This time, their search was not a casual one. They worked with a meticulousness born of determination. Robinson systematically examined every inch of the shed's interior, running his hands along the splintered wooden walls, his eyes scanning for any anomaly. Ash, his senses sharper than any human's, was his guide. The dog was a ghost of a shadow, a silent partner sniffing along the floorboards, pausing only when something piqued his interest. For almost an hour, they found nothing new. Robinson was about to give up when he noticed Ash stop at the back of the shed. It was the same corner where they had found the crates, but this time, Ash wasn't interested in the floor. He began to nose at a section of the wall, whining softly, then started to scratch at the wood with his claws. It was a persistent, urgent sound. "What is it, boy?" Robinson asked, kneeling beside him. He ran his hand over the rough planks. They felt solid, just like the rest of the walls. But Ash's intuition was something he had come to trust completely. He knocked on the wall with his knuckles. The sound was different. Not the solid thud of the other walls, but a faint, hollow echo. Robinson's heart began to beat a little faster. He looked closer, shining his flashlight on the area. The wood planks were slightly ajar, almost imperceptibly so, and there were faint lines where they met. He pushed and pulled, his fingers searching for a latch or a seam. Finally, with a soft click, a small section of the wall gave way. It was a false wall, cleverly designed to blend in perfectly. Ash nudged the opening with his nose, and Robinson reached in. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He carefully pulled it out. It was a small, exquisitely crafted metal box, rusted with age but still clearly designed with great care. A single, ornate lock secured it. Robinson took a deep breath, the thrill of discovery rushing through him. This was it. This had to be the secret heart of the shed's mystery. He used a pair of pliers from his toolkit to gently pry the lock open, being careful not to damage the delicate craftsmanship of the box. The lid lifted with a soft sigh of metal on metal. Inside, the box was lined with velvet that had long since crumbled to dust. It held 2 items, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon and a small leather-bound diary, its cover fragile and worn. Robinson took out the diary first, his hands trembling slightly with a sense of momentous discovery. He opened it to the first page, where the elegant script introduced the author. His eyes scanned the familiar name, Eleanor Reynolds. He felt a jolt of recognition. Mr. Dalton had spoken about her family, but not her. He realized he was now holding the personal story of a woman who had lived a century ago, a private life no one was meant to see. He began to read. The first entries described the life of a young woman from a prominent family, but as he read further, the tone shifted. Eleanor's words were filled with longing and coded references to a man she could not be with. He was her secret suitor, a man from a different world, who filled her heart with passion but could not be with her openly. She referred to him only by his initials, the same two that had haunted Robinson since he first found the blueprint, R.S. The story was no longer a historical puzzle. It was a deeply emotional and tragic romance. The diary was a record of a love affair that had to be hidden from the world, a narrative of passion and rebellion against societal norms. Robinson sat on the dusty floor, lost in Eleanor's words, a silent witness to a beautiful, forbidden love. The mystery of R.S. was no longer a vague historical question. It was the story of a man who loved a woman with his whole heart, a story Robinson and Ash had been destined to find. The discovery of Eleanor Reynolds's diary had changed everything. Robinson sat at his kitchen table, the brittle pages spread out before him, a sense of awe washing over his worn-out spirit. The story of a secret, passionate love between Eleanor and her R.S. was more than he could have ever imagined. It was a beautiful and tragic narrative, a century-old secret he now held in his hands. He and Ash had found the soul of the mystery, but the words were a puzzle. Eleanor's entries were filled with poetic references and veiled language, as if she knew her diary might one day be found. Robinson knew he needed a specialist to truly understand her hidden meanings. He spent the evening researching local historians and professors. His search led him to the local university and to Dr. Wallace, a name that appeared frequently in papers on historical linguistics and local history. He found her profile online, which described her as a woman in her late 52nd, with a keen mind and an expertise in deciphering old and complex texts. The next morning, he made a call to her office. When Robinson explained his unique situation, a found diary, a mysterious set of initials, and a hidden love story, Dr. Wallace was intrigued. Her voice was gentle but firm, and she agreed to meet with him, her academic curiosity piqued by his unusual request. The meeting took place in her cozy office, filled with towering bookshelves and the scent of old paper and coffee. Dr. Wallace was a kind woman, with a warm, empathetic gaze and a bright, focused energy. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a comfortable cardigan over a tweed jacket. She welcomed Robinson and Ash warmly, offering the dog a bowl of water and a place to rest by her desk. Robinson carefully laid the diary on her desk, the pages rustling with age. As Dr. Wallace examined the handwriting, her eyes lit up. "This is exquisite," she murmured. "The language. It's a beautiful mix of formal prose and a deeply personal, almost rebellious tone." She was a true poet. For the next few hours, Dr. Wallace and Robinson worked together. She would read an entry aloud and then explain the subtle nuances of the language, pointing out how Eleanor used metaphors and allusions to cloak her feelings. Robinson listened intently, a deeper understanding of Eleanor's world unfolding with every word. Ash lay by his feet, his ears perked up, as if listening to the ghost of a story told so long ago. Then they came to an entry that made Dr. Wallace pause, her brow furrowed in concentration. She pointed to a line that read, "Our final legacy, a future for the birds that will one day fly from our nest." Robinson looked at the line, baffled. "What do you think she means?" Dr. Wallace leaned back in her chair, her eyes sparkling with excitement. In 19th century society, families often referred to their children as birds, and the term nest often represented the family home or estate. She's not just talking about her children, she's talking about their descendants and a legacy. This isn't just about their love. Dawn. She turned a few more pages, finding another entry that was even more direct. Our secret will be laid to rest, a final treasure for those who come after us. I believe this is a direct reference to a hidden treasure, Dr. Wallace said, her voice a hushed whisper. A treasure meant for their descendants. It would explain the blueprint for a grand house and why it was left behind. They were planning a future they never got to have. Adu thought Mile. Well, she then told him a detail from her own research that had always puzzled her. In my study of the Reynolds family, there was a rumor that a significant portion of their wealth was never accounted for when they vanished. Historians always assumed it was a rumor, or that it was simply lost. But what if it wasn't? What if it was buried here? What if Eleanor and R.S. hid it on the property? Robinson's heart pounded in his chest. A treasure. The mystery had just taken a monumental turn. It was no longer just a history lesson. It was a physical quest. He felt a surge of energy, a sense of purpose he hadn't had since his days in the service. The burden of this discovery was heavy, but it was also a gift, a sign that he was meant to be here, that his journey had a higher purpose than just finding a quiet place to live. He looked down at Ash, who met his gaze with an intelligent, unwavering expression. The dog had known all along that something was here, something important. Now Robinson knew what it was. The search for the truth was over. The hunt for a legacy had just begun. The discovery of the hidden treasure was a jolt of pure energy for Robinson. He felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. He and Ash returned to the property, the diary and blueprint now securely in his possession. Their quest had a clear objective: find the treasure and uncover the final secrets of Eleanor and R.S. The land no longer felt like a place of quiet solitude. It was a living puzzle box. But their newfound focus was abruptly shattered. A few days later, a formal document arrived in Robinson's mailbox. The envelope was thick and official, its contents a stark contrast to the peaceful life he was trying to build. He opened it, and his heart sank as he read the title, Summons and Complaint. It was a lawsuit. The plaintiff was listed as Sterling, a man who claimed to be a distant relative of the Reynolds family. The complaint alleged that the land and all its contents belonged to Sterling by right of a long-lost inheritance and a deed that had supposedly been hidden for generations. The language was cold, legal, and impersonal, a direct attack on the life Robinson had just begun. Ash, sensing the sudden shift in Robinson's demeanor, nudged his hand with a soft whimper. Robinson placed the document on the table and ran his hand through the dog's fur. The legal notice was a cold, cruel interruption to the beautiful, hidden story he had just discovered. Robinson knew this was more than a simple land dispute. He could have ignored it. He could have walked away. The land was not worth the cost of a long, drawn-out legal battle. But the thought of it sent a jolt of fierce protectiveness through him. This was not just a plot of land. It was a legacy. It was Eleanor's diary, R.S. T.S. blueprint, and the promise of a future for a family that had been robbed of one. It was a story he and Ash had fought to uncover. He knew then that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about them. It was about Eleanor and R.S. This was a battle for a past that deserved to be honored and a future that deserved to be built. He contacted a lawyer in town, a quiet man named Marcus who listened to Robinson's wild story of sheds and diaries with a patient, unblinking gaze. Marcus looked at the documents Robinson had brought him, his face giving nothing away. "This will be an uphill battle," Marcus said. "Our claim of lost inheritance is difficult to prove, but we'll do what we can." Word of the lawsuit spread quickly through the small community. Robinson had tried to keep to himself, but the story of the veteran and his German shepherd, who had found a hidden love story in a forgotten shed, had already captured the town's imagination. People who he had barely spoken to began to reach out. The owner of the local hardware store offered him tools for free. An old man who ran a coffee stand gave him a warm cup every morning. They all knew his story, and they were all on his side. One afternoon, a local rancher stopped him on the street. "Heard about your troubles with that Sterling fella," the man said, his face rugged and kind. "Don't you worry. We'll make sure you're taken care of. This land has been forgotten for too long. It's a good thing you and your dog came along to wake it up." Robinson felt a swell of emotion in his chest. He had come here for solitude, to escape the bonds of duty and the weight of the past. Instead, he had found a new purpose and a community that was fighting for him. It was a powerful, humbling feeling. He was not alone in this fight. He had a loyal partner in Ash and the support of an entire town. The lawsuit was not a deterrent. It was a test. Robinson knew that he had to fight not just for the land, but for the truth. He was the custodian of a story that needed to be told, a legacy that needed to be fulfilled. He was no longer just a veteran seeking a peaceful life. He was the hero of a story he never knew he was in. The battle was set, and Robinson knew, with Ash by his side, they were ready for it. The legal summons was a wake-up call, a blunt reminder that Robinson's time was running out. Sterling's claim was a threat not just to his land, but to the entire story he and Ash had uncovered. Robinson knew that to win, he needed more than a diary and a blueprint. He needed a final, undeniable piece of evidence. He and Ash returned to the shed, the legal papers lying on the truck's dashboard like a silent challenge. The shed's silence now felt heavy, charged with urgency. Robinson went through the contents of the crates one more time, with a focus born of desperation. He examined every letter, every photograph, and every document, looking for a clue, a symbol, anything he might have missed. He spread the artifacts out on the dusty floor, his mind racing. Ash lay beside him, his gaze fixed on Robinson, his tail giving a single, hopeful thump against the floor. Robinson was about to give up when Ash's head suddenly perked up. The dog's ears swiveled, and his nose began to twitch. Ash got up, walked over to one of the crates, and began to nose at its bottom. Robinson, who had already checked the crate, watched with a puzzled expression. Ash was not interested in the contents. He was interested in the structure itself. The dog let out a soft whine, then started to paw at the thin layer of wood at the bottom of the crate. Robinson knelt down and felt the base. He noticed a slight give, a loose panel he had overlooked before. He carefully pried it up. Tucked beneath the crate's false bottom was a single, folded piece of parchment. It was a map, hand-drawn with intricate detail. Robinson let out a gasp. Ash nudged the paper with his nose, as if to say, "I told you it was here." The map was old, its lines faded but clear. It showed the property, with landmarks drawn in elegant script. But what mattered most was a single X marked on the far end of the land, in a secluded, overgrown thicket. There was a drawing of a small key next to it, the same ornate key Robinson had found in the box with the diary. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him. This was it. This was the final clue. Robinson and Ash set out immediately. They navigated the dense brush and winding paths, following the landmarks on the map. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. Ash moved confidently, his nose to the ground, his senses far sharper than Robinson's own. He led him through the thicket, past old trees and thorny bushes, to the spot marked by the X. The location was overgrown with vines and thick foliage. Robinson began to clear the area, his heart pounding with excitement. He pulled out a small shovel from his pack and began to dig. The ground was tough and rocky, but the motivation was immense. He dug for almost an hour, the hole growing deeper and deeper. Just as he was beginning to feel discouraged, his shovel hit something solid with a resounding clang. Robinson froze, then began to dig with renewed vigor. He uncovered the corner of a metal object. He used his hands to clear away the last of the dirt, revealing a large, rusted chest. It was old and heavy, its surface covered in ornate designs that had been worn away by the years. Ash nudged it with his nose, then looked up at Robinson, his eyes filled with a shared sense of triumph. With a final effort, Robinson lifted the chest out of the hole and laid it on the ground. He took out the small key from the box and carefully inserted it into the chest's lock. The lock clicked open with a satisfying sound. He lifted the heavy lid, revealing the contents. The chest was filled with a dazzling array of gold coins and antique jewelry that glinted in the fading light. But nestled amongst the treasure was the true prize, a sealed letter. Robinson picked up the letter, his hands shaking slightly. He opened it and began to read the familiar, elegant script of R.S. It was a final message from a man to his descendants, a testament to his love for Eleanor and his hope for the future. The letter spoke of a life unlived and a love that was forced into secrecy. And at the bottom, in that same familiar, looping hand, was a full signature. Your ancestor, Robert Stevenson. Robinson's world tilted. The sense of familiarity, the strange pull he felt to the initials, it all made sense. The man who had loved Eleanor Reynolds, the man who had drawn the blueprint for a home they never got to build, was his own ancestor. The legacy wasn't just on the land, it was in his blood. The treasure was real, but the true prize was the truth. It was the irrefutable evidence he needed, a link to the past that was now his most powerful weapon in the legal fight to come. The day in court was quiet, lacking the dramatic flair of a television show. Robinson sat beside his lawyer, Marcus, feeling the reassuring weight of the historical documents he had carefully placed in a briefcase. The letter from his ancestor, Robert Stevenson, felt like a living thing, a final witness in a century-old case. When Sterling's lawyer stood to present his flimsy claims, a cold arrogance filled the air. But Robinson wasn't worried. He was calm. He looked at Ash, who sat patiently by his feet, a silent pillar of strength. The dog had found the truth, and now it was Robinson's turn to present it. When Marcus stood to speak, he didn't just argue a legal case. He told a story. He spoke of a veteran and his loyal dog, of a forgotten shed and a hidden love. He presented the diary of Eleanor Reynolds and the blueprint of her suitor. Then, with a flourish, he placed Robert Stevenson's letter on the table. The letter was a powerful testament. Its words were a final will and testament, not of land, but of love and hope. It named Robinson's great-grandfather, a forgotten branch of the Stevenson family, as the intended recipient of the legacy. The full signature, Robert Stevenson, provided irrefutable proof. The lawyer for Sterling, the distant relative, looked at the document in stunned disbelief. His entire case was based on a lie and a faded claim. The evidence of lineage was undeniable. Within moments, seeing no path to victory, Sterling's lawyer turned to the judge and announced his client was withdrawing the lawsuit. The victory was not loud. It was quiet and profound. Robinson felt a wave of relief wash over him, but more than that, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had done it. He had protected not just the land, but the legacy of his ancestors. The land, which was once a place of solitude, now felt like a place of purpose. With the legal battle behind him, Robinson focused on fulfilling the final wish of his ancestors. He began the work of restoring the old shed. He cleaned it from top to bottom, reinforced the structure, and carefully curated the artifacts inside. The diary was placed in a glass case, its pages open to an entry on Eleanor's love for Robert. The blueprint was hung on the wall, a testament to a beautiful dream. He called it the Stevenson Reynolds Legacy Museum, and he and Ash were its first custodians. The community, who had rallied to his side, was invited to see it. People came from all over town, their eyes filled with emotion as they learned of the hidden love story that had been buried in their own backyard. As the days grew shorter and the air crisper, Robinson began building his home. He worked with his hands, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. He made sure to respect the history of the land. The house was designed with a large, spacious porch, and he even incorporated elements of Robert Stevenson's original blueprint into the design, a final tribute to his ancestors' vision. The house was almost complete when Robinson and Ash stood on the wide porch one evening. The sun was setting, a fiery display of orange and purple across the vast Montana sky. Robinson looked down at his faithful companion, his gray and white fur glinting in the fading light. Ash had been with him every step of the way. He had found the shed, smelled the secrets, and led him to the hidden map. He wasn't just a dog. He was the key to everything. Robinson knelt down and wrapped his arms around Ash, burying his face in the dog's fur. The gratitude he felt was overwhelming, a love so deep it was almost painful. This was his home, and it was a home built on a foundation of a love story he never knew existed, a legacy he was meant to protect, and the unwavering loyalty of his best friend. He decided then and there to make it official. The house, built with his own hands on a legacy he had uncovered, would have a name that honored the true hero of their story. He stood up, looking at the newly built walls and the wide porch, and said the words out loud for the first time. "Welcome home, Ash House. It ever my overword say." Our story reminds us that some of the greatest treasures aren't found in a chest, but in the unwavering love and loyalty we share with our most faithful companions. The legacy we leave behind is not just in monuments or memories, but in the quiet, everyday kindnesses that connect us to the past and build a future. If this tale touched your heart, please support us by subscribing to the channel. Let's continue to share these powerful stories together. To see what other incredible tales we've uncovered, click the video that's on your screen now.